challenge. And you might say, well, this voice isn't me. Where did it come from? Well, we like to think that we're so intelligent and so evolved, and we are. But what we perceive as our intelligence, our consciousness, is really just the top layer, both in our minds and even in our brains. And there's this deeper part of us, this primal part of us that's evolved to keep us alive. And it's trying to move you away from pain towards pleasure, to find connection and avoid rejection, and to guide you back to what's normal to you or to what's familiar. And so this deeper part of your mind is working to do all of these things that we really needed to survive in a more primal time, but in the modern world often don't actually help us. And you might say, well, but where do these thoughts come from? Well, that part of your mind is largely programmed by the time you're 7 years old. And when we're younger than 7, we're just kind of like a tape recorder. Everything that's happening around us, everything people are saying, everything we're saying, it's just going in and creating kind of an imprint that guides us. And unfortunately, we didn't know about all this stuff. Many of us were subject to a parenting style that was behavior or outcome based. And what I mean by that is that they wanted you to be quiet at the dinner table. They wanted you to put out your room. They wanted you to stop crying in public. It didn't matter how we got there, how you got to that outcome, how your parents got to that outcome. It was just, I want this outcome. And we didn't know all of the things that we say to kids and how they affect them. So, a kid that's going in the grocery store, oh, Mom, I want this candy. Might say something like, you don't deserve that. Might say something at the table like, oh, girls that speak out loud don't deserve dessert, don't get dessert. Boys that don't clean up their toys don't get to play with them. We heard all kinds of things like this when we were younger. Be quiet. The adults are speaking. Oh, things like that are for rich people, not for us. You don't deserve that. You're bad. You're not good enough because you didn't get an A. And it's not really our parents' fault, because we just didn't know everything about the mind. We didn't know. We thought, kids are just kids. They're fine. But actually, kids are taking in the most. And so it's not about being angry, but it is about understanding. So a lot of that went in when we were young. Also, things that are normalized to us become normal, are normal. So if you hear things in the media all the time, if you normalize that people hate their job, if that working a 9 to 5 in a mundane way, if you think that's what everybody does, then that becomes normal and you just expect it. But, to someone that's an entrepreneur, that's the worst thing in the world. If you are around people that normalize, jealousy and fighting in relationships, then that becomes normal to you. I had a client recently who had a very I don't know if I'd say definitely emotionally abusive childhood, and in the sense that there was a lot of yelling and screaming and just kind of like unpleasantness. And she said to me, all growing up, even when I was a teenager, when I would see families on TV, I thought that it was pretend. I was like, nobody acts like that. Nobody behaves like that. Everyone's like our family, and they just yell and scream. And she couldn't imagine that families were loving, that dads sat with their kids and spent time with them, that people talked about their feelings, that the child would have a voice in the family, because that was just so unfamiliar to her. And this yelling way of being was so normal that she just thought, of course everyone's like that. And many people that come from an upbringing like that go and create relationships and recreate that, because that's what they've experienced, is that you yell, you get upset, you threaten leaving when you feel jealous or threatened or whatever, because that's so normal. We have this tendency to go, oh, that person's a monster. I can't believe they behave like that. Instead of going, what happened to you? What happened to you to make this? And you asking to yourself, what happened to me? Because once you understand why, what's going on and where it came from, you can change it. And a huge part of this starts with listening to that inner narrative and interrupting it, but we're not even going to worry about interrupting it today. We're just going to listen. And if you're having a hard time with this, if you're going, I don't know what you're talking about with the voice, it's your thoughts. When you think a thought and you're aware of it at the same time, it's the same thing that goes, if you're saying in your mind, oh, I don't understand, that in your mind, I don't understand, that's the very thing that you're listening to. If your mind's like, oh, I've got to go, I've got to check my calendar, or I've got to pick up my kids, or I've got to remember to do this today, that thought in your head, that's the very thing we're listening to. And many of us are so used to just sitting in our thoughts and kind of being one with them that we don't realize that we can actually observe those thoughts, that stream of consciousness that's in our head.